It was a gray, somber morning. Rain hadn't yet begun to fall, but the clouds above seemed to carry the weight of the day. Rows of uniforms stretched out like a sea of discipline and decorum. White gloves, polished medals, chests held high. A funeral for a highly decorated general was no small event. This one in particular had drawn dignitaries, politicians, and elite military figures from across the country. The ceremony was scheduled down to the second, with military precision. No room for error. No room for outsiders. At the gates, an elderly black man stood quietly. His suit was modest, slightly frayed at the sleeves, and his shoes, once polished to a fine shine, now showed signs of wear and time. He held a weathered envelope in his hand and a single red carnation. His face was solemn, not from sadness alone, but from something deeper, something forged in years of silence and sacrifice. He didn't make a scene. He didn't push. He simply presented his ID to the young soldier at the checkpoint and said softly, "I'm here for General Whitaker." The soldier glanced at the ID, his expression tightening. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "This is a private service. Invite only." "I know," the old man replied. "But I was invited. Not formally. The general, he told me to come if I was still around." The young guard didn't know what to make of that. He looked at the man's ID again. No military credentials, no guest badge, no formal invite. "You'll have to step aside, sir." Still, the man didn't argue. He stepped aside, not wanting to cause any disruption, but the pain in his eyes said enough. As the gates closed in front of him, a colonel walked by and glanced in the old man's direction. He paused only briefly, offered a quick nod, and kept walking. A few people noticed the old man but dismissed him. Just another outsider trying to sneak into an event he didn't belong in. But what no one knew, at least not yet, was that this man didn't just belong there. He had earned that place more than half the people inside. Inside the ceremonial grounds, the honor guard stood ready. A folded flag sat atop the casket. Taps had not yet played, but the air was heavy with the anticipation of finality. High-ranking generals were seated beneath canopies, their uniforms adorned with clusters of stars and bars. Conversations were hushed, movements stiff with formality. Then, in the middle of this precise military ritual, a staff sergeant rushed up to one of the senior aides. "Sir," he whispered, "there's an elderly civilian at the gate. Claims he was invited by General Whitaker himself. No formal invite, no credentials." The aide waved it off. "Handle it. We don't have time for confusion." But a four-star general nearby overheard. General Marcus Devereux. Legendary, decorated in multiple campaigns, known not just for his tactics, but for his humanity, something not every general was remembered for. He looked up sharply. "What did you say?" he asked the aide. "There's a man at the gate, elderly, civilian, no credentials, apparently claims he knew Whitaker." Devereux's face shifted. Slowly, deliberately, he stood. "Was he black?" he asked. "Yes, sir." Devereux's voice dropped, but his words cut through the air like a command. "Stop the ceremony." Everyone froze. "General?" a colonel asked, stunned. "You heard me," Devereux said. "Nobody moves. Hold the procession." He turned and walked, fast, for a man of his age, toward the entrance gate. People murmured. Confusion rippled through the crowd. Military funerals don't just pause for protocol breaks. But General Devereux wasn't concerned with protocol. He was remembering something. Something Whitaker had told him long ago, about a man who saved his life, years before the stars ever touched his shoulder. At the gate, the old man was just starting to turn away when the guard stiffened, noticing Devereux's approach. The old man looked up, startled. He recognized the general immediately, and he lowered his head, unsure of whether to salute or simply step aside. But Devereux didn't hesitate. He walked straight to him and embraced him. A full, heartfelt embrace. "Henry," the general said, "you made it." The young guard's jaws dropped. They exchanged looks, suddenly aware they'd blocked someone the general himself knew, personally. "I'm sorry, General," one guard stammered. "We didn't know." Devereux turned, calm but firm. "It's not your fault. You were doing your job. But let me make something very clear. This man isn't just a guest. He's family." He turned back to Henry. "Come with me. The general would have been furious if you weren't here." The walk back was surreal. All eyes followed them, some curious, some confused. The murmurs grew. Who was this man? Why had everything stopped for him? As Devereux guided him down the main aisle, Henry held tightly to his envelope and that single red carnation. He wasn't a man used to attention, but now, with every step, attention was all he received, and he hated it, because he wasn't there to be seen. He was there to remember a man who'd once promised, "If I go before you, and there's a funeral, you better be there. I don't care what anyone says." At the front, Devereux gestured for Henry to sit beside him. In a place reserved only for the highest-ranking officers and family members, some side-eyes came from the rows nearby. But Devereux ignored them. The ceremony resumed. Speeches were made. A eulogy delivered by a senator who didn't even know the general personally. But when it came time for the personal reflections, Devereux rose again. "Before I speak," he said, "there's someone who needs to go first." Someone who knew General Whitaker in a way none of us here ever did, Mr. Henry Carter. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. A civilian? Speaking at a military funeral? But nobody dared interrupt. Henry stood slowly, every joint in his body aching. He stepped forward, holding the envelope in one hand, the carnation in the other. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at the casket. 48 years ago, he began. A young private got caught in crossfire in Vietnam, ambushed, bleeding out. His squad had scattered. The radio was gone. And he thought he was going to die in that jungle alone. You could hear a pin drop. I was a medic, not military, a field volunteer. My orders were simple: don't intervene unless absolutely necessary. But I heard someone calling out, faint, scared. I didn't care about orders that day. People were beginning to sit up straighter. Some leaned forward. I carried that boy 3 miles on my back, got him to a chopper. He kept whispering, "Don't leave me, don't leave me." I never did. For 2 weeks I stayed by his hospital bed, even when the doctors told me to go. When he finally woke up, he grabbed my hand and said, "If I ever make it out of this, I'm going to make sure you're not forgotten." Henry's voice cracked. That boy was Private Elijah Whitaker. Silence. Total, profound silence. He wrote me every year, on my birthday, sent letters, sent pictures, called when he made sergeant, again when he made captain, and when he made general, he called just to say, "You were the first one who believed I'd live to see tomorrow." He opened the envelope and pulled out a letter. This is from him, dated 5 months ago. He read aloud. "Henry, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope they let you in. But if they don't, you show them this letter. Tell them I don't want a single medal, a single speech, or a single damn flag over my body unless you're there to see it. You are my brother in arms, in a war that didn't even want to claim you." A few gasps could be heard. Henry stepped back, placed the red carnation on the casket, and returned to his seat. When General Devereux rose to speak, his voice was hoarse with emotion. "I've attended 100 of these ceremonies, maybe more. But today I realized that the measure of a soldier is not just in their medals or ranks, but in the lives they touched, the people they never forgot, and the promises they kept." He looked around. There are people here who knew the general from the Pentagon, from his final tour, from cocktail parties and Senate briefings. But none of us knew him like Mr. Carter did. The audience, now visibly moved, began to shift from discomfort to reverence. After the ceremony, people lined up to shake Henry's hand. What once was confusion turned into respect. The colonel who had dismissed him earlier came up and saluted him. Devereux stood beside him the whole time, telling anyone who asked, "This man saved the general's life. There'd be no stars on that casket without him." Later, as they watched the flag being folded and handed to Whitaker's widow, she clutched Henry's hand and whispered, "He always said you were his guardian angel." Henry didn't say anything. He didn't need to. By the end of the day, the story had spread through every corner of the military community. People who had once thought the old man didn't belong now realized he had been the very foundation of the story they were honoring. And for the first time in a long time, Henry didn't feel invisible. Henry stood silently, the eyes of every soldier and civilian now fixed on him. The general, chest heavy with medals, stepped down from the podium and walked directly toward him. With each step, the silence deepened. Henry didn't move. His eyes brimmed with quiet humility, hands still clutching the small, weathered photograph of a young soldier, General Whitaker, taken over 70 years ago. When Devereux reached him, he stopped, removed his hat, and stood tall. "This man," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear, "is the reason General Whitaker ever made it home. Without him, there would be no medals, no legacy, no family left behind. Today, we were about to bury a hero while ignoring the man who made his heroism possible." The general turned and addressed the crowd again, voice unwavering. "I'm issuing an immediate order. This man is to be escorted with full military honor to the front row. He will stand with the general's family, because he is family." Henry, stunned, tried to refuse. "Sir, that's not necessary. I just came to pay my respects." But Devereux wouldn't have it. "You didn't just come. You carried a memory for decades that we all forgot. That ends now." Two young soldiers, still in dress blues, stepped forward, their expressions no longer indifferent. They saluted Henry before gently guiding him down the aisle. The once skeptical crowd now rose to its feet, creating a path for him. Applause began to swell, hesitant at first, then thunderous. As Henry took his place beside the general's widow, she reached for his hand and held it tightly. "He told me about you," she whispered. "He never stopped talking about the man who carried him through the jungle. He said you were braver than any soldier he ever knew." Tears rolled down Henry's face. For years he had lived in silence, his story buried like so many others. But now, in front of generals, soldiers, and citizens, the truth was no longer hidden. The service resumed, but everything had changed. The honor was no longer one-sided. It was complete. As the flag was folded and handed to the widow, she did something no one expected. She turned and handed it to Henry. "He would want you to have this," she said. Henry froze. "Ma'am, I can't. This belongs with you." She smiled through her tears. "You already gave me everything. You gave me him." The crowd watched in awe as Henry accepted the flag, trembling, holding it like a sacred relic. The 21-gun salute echoed through the sky, not just for General Whitaker, but for the man who carried his soul through the fire. And as the last notes of taps played, a soft breeze swept through the cemetery, as if history itself was finally exhaling. For once, justice had arrived on time, not in a courtroom, not in a headline, but in a quiet moment of truth, love, and overdue honor. And somewhere above, perhaps, a soldier stood at attention, smiling at his old friend, finally seen. After the ceremony, many people approached Henry, some with tears in their eyes, others with silent nods of respect. Veterans, officers, even young cadets who hadn't lived through war but had heard stories from their grandfathers, all came to shake his hand. For the first time in decades, Henry felt seen. A young black soldier stepped forward, no more than 22, trembling slightly as he saluted. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. I've been in this uniform for 2 years, but today I understand what it means." Henry placed a hand on his shoulder. "You wear it with pride. Just don't let them tell you that your story doesn't matter." That evening, Henry returned to his small apartment in a modest neighborhood outside Atlanta. The flag sat folded neatly on his coffee table. For hours, he stared at it, not with sorrow, but peace. The weight of silence he'd carried for years was finally lifted. But the story didn't end there. The very next morning, a news van was parked outside his building. Then another, and another. Word had spread. Footage of General Devereaux halting the funeral had gone viral overnight. Millions watched the video on social media. 4-star general stops funeral to honor forgotten hero. By the end of the week, Henry's name was trending nationwide. But unlike the fleeting trends of gossip and scandal, this one was different. Schools began teaching his story. Military academies asked him to speak. The Secretary of Defense personally called to offer him the Presidential Medal of Freedom nomination. Henry politely declined the interviews at first. "I didn't do it for applause," he said to one persistent journalist. "I just did what was right." But then he thought about all the other men, the other black soldiers, medics, porters, engineers, whose sacrifices were erased or ignored. Men like him, men even braver. Their names were never called, their stories never told. So he changed his mind. 2 weeks later, Henry stood before a crowded auditorium at West Point. Behind him, a massive screen showed a black and white photo of a young man in uniform, his uniform, taken before he ever stepped foot on the battlefield. He gripped the microphone. "I carried a general through a war zone," he began. "But I also carried something heavier for much longer: invisibility. For a long time, I believed that if I just kept my head down and did what was right, history would remember. But I was wrong. History doesn't remember on its own. It has to be reminded." The audience sat frozen in silence. I'm not the only one. There are thousands of names, black soldiers, nurses, builders, patriots, who never made it into the books, but who built the very foundation of this country's strength. Don't just honor me. Go find them. Tell their stories too. By the end of his speech, the crowd had risen. Not just in applause, but in resolve. Henry returned home that night to find a small envelope in his mailbox. It had no return address, just his name, written in careful cursive. Inside was a handwritten letter and a photograph. The letter read, "Dear Henry, you probably don't remember me, I was 5 when you carried my father off that battlefield. He used to tell me the story every birthday and every Christmas until the day he died. He always said he owed you everything, but you didn't just save his life. You gave me a father. Thank you. Sarah Whitaker. Henry stared at the photo. It was a picture of General Whitaker sitting in a rocking chair, holding a baby girl. Both were smiling. He leaned back in his chair, holding the photo close, his eyes glistening with memory. That night, Henry didn't dream of war or pain or loss. He dreamt of a young man running through the jungle, not afraid, but proud, carrying not just a general, but history on his shoulders. Weeks passed, but the momentum didn't stop. Veterans organizations across the country began reaching out to Henry, asking him to share his experience. Letters poured in, not just from fellow servicemen, but from students, teachers, parents. A school in Alabama renamed its library after him. A university in Chicago invited him to receive an honorary doctorate in military history. For the first time in his life, Henry was being recognized not for surviving, but for serving. He traveled to Washington, D.C. under special escort. There, inside the rotunda of the Capitol, the president awarded him the Congressional Gold Medal. The applause was thunderous, but Henry kept his acceptance speech short. "I'm honored," he said, "but I accept this not just for me. I accept it for every name history forgot." By now, Henry's story had been turned into a documentary. His face appeared on magazine covers. A children's book was even published about his life, titled "The Man Who Carried a General." The final page read, "Sometimes heroes don't wear medals. Sometimes they carry them." But despite the fame, Henry remained grounded. He returned to his quiet life. Same modest apartment, same daily walk to the corner diner, still smiling at the neighbors, still holding the door open for strangers. One afternoon, he was invited to speak at the opening of a new memorial, a monument dedicated to unsung heroes of war. His name, carved in stone, sat beneath a bronze statue of a man carrying another soldier over his shoulders. As the curtain dropped to reveal the statue, a small boy in the crowd asked his mother, "Is that Superman?" Henry chuckled when he overheard it. The mother smiled and whispered back, "No, baby. That's better than Superman. That's real." In the months that followed, Henry's health began to fade. He had lived a long life, longer than most of his unit. And now, as winter crept in, he began to feel the weight of time catching up to him. One night, after reading another letter from a young soldier who said Henry inspired him to join the army, he placed the letter next to the flag on his mantle and went to bed early. He passed in his sleep, peaceful, with dignity. News of his passing hit the nation like a shockwave. Television anchors broke into their broadcasts. Flags were ordered to half-staff. Even the Pentagon issued an official statement. "Today, we lost a soldier whose service spanned far beyond the battlefield. Henry Carter showed us that one man, forgotten by history, can change it forever." At his funeral, Henry was given full military honors. This time, there were no questions at the gate. No one stopped him from entering. 4 generals, 3 senators, and the president attended. The service took place on the same grounds where he had once been turned away. But now, the entire front row was filled with people whose lives he had touched. From General Whitaker's children and grandchildren, to young officers who'd memorized his story like scripture. And as the flag was folded for the final time, the same young black soldier who had saluted Henry months earlier stepped forward to deliver it. He bent down, holding the flag with both hands, and whispered, "Rest easy, sir. We've got it from here. Henry was laid to rest with honors befitting a legend. And in that quiet corner of the cemetery, where once he was denied entry, a new plaque was placed. Here lies Henry Carter, hero. He didn't wear stars on his shoulder, but he lit the path for those who did. Back at home, on the wall of a small public school in Georgia, Henry's portrait hangs above the motto, "Character is not measured by rank, but by the weight you carry for others." And every year, on Veterans Day, school children gather to read his story aloud. Not because history remembered him, but because he reminded history. Because he showed the world that no act of courage is ever too small,